Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and as I mentioned a couple of weeks before, I want to share some photographs with you that I made while I was traveling in the Dominican Republic. And I'm going to walk you through my whole thought process and share the series of images that culminated in the photograph that I particularly like from this series. Now, when I was there, we were at the beach, and it was in the middle of the afternoon, so it was probably around 12, 1, something around those lines. Middle of the day, not the greatest light to be shooting in, but it's a great time to be at the beach. While we were getting ready to sort of pack up and go back to the house, I saw this red gate across the street, and I saw how the late afternoon light was hitting it. It was very saturated, and I thought, well, that would make a great backdrop for a portrait. So I grabbed a family friend, Yoel, who you see here, who has a great head of hair. And I knew I wanted to make a photograph of someone, and he was just the perfect subject. The saturated color of the door, I thought, would complement his skin tone and the hair in a really sort of beautiful way. So I grabbed him and we walked across the street, and this was sort of the initial shot that I made. So I filled the entire frame with the gate, and I included him in the shot, and I started making a series of photographs. As you can see here, I was shooting at 1/1900th of a second at 5.6 at ISO 800. Typically, when I'm shooting out on the street, I usually have my ISO set for about 400 or 800, even if it's a bright situation. Because if I want to close down the aperture, say to a f11 or 16, I know I still have a reasonable shutter speed. With the performance of the camera that I had, which was the X100S, the Fuji, I knew that I would get more than satisfactory image quality, even if I wasn't shooting at the lowest ISO. I composed a shot, and I start making a couple of frames, and almost immediately, I kind of know that, I've made these kinds of shots before, where I get a really sort of color-saturated background. I place an interesting subject there, and it's a pleasing enough portrait, but I knew I wanted to do something else. And I noticed the light, and I was being very observant of how the light was hitting him because of the position and because of his hair. There was a lot of shadow that was going to be cast on his face. So I had to pay careful attention to that as best as possible. I saw the shadow that's being cast on the wall, so I decided to, eventually pull back a little bit. And still, I'm looking at this and thinking, yeah, it's good, but it's not particularly great. So I pull even further back, and I see the structure that's behind him, and I think, maybe I should include more of that in there, so it isn't this sort of uniform red background. Even though I love the repeating pattern, the saturated color and all that, I want to make a more interesting composition, because otherwise it's just a glorified headshot. So I kind of pull back and I look at the scene and I go, okay, that looks like it could be a little more interesting. We have those repeating red posts in the back that are helping to support the roof line. That might work. And I keep shooting and I pull back even more. And I notice the yellow color of the structure, and I go, that might be really interesting, having that yellow contrasting with the red and the inclusion of the blue sky. That would work. But almost immediately, as I'm taking a look at the frame and I see this horizontal composition, in my gut I'm feeling, oh God, there's just too much space to the left, to the right. He's being completely lost, and the challenge becomes, well, where do you want the viewer to look first? Obviously, he's important to the shot, but the red wall, the yellow building behind them, all of them are sort of competing with each other for the viewer's attention. What's this shot about? So it being shot as a horizontal is not particularly working for me. I'm getting a little closer, but it's not there. And there's a lot of wind blowing, and that's another reason why the fast shutter speed here works really nicely, is because with the wind blowing as hard as it was, I wanted to freeze the movement of the hair. So I'm making these, and I'm sort of refining the overall composition, and just not feeling it. And then I decide to go vertical. And at that point, I start seeing the potential of this to play out really, really nicely. All of a sudden, the structure of the house to the left and to the right are less pronounced. So we have these sort of wings in the back to the left and the right of the main triangle of the building. And when I go to the vertical, I lose all that. So it simplifies the house and creates this nice, triangle that serves as a nice counterpoint to the gate itself. It doesn't pull our attention as much as this does, because the complexity of the pattern here is really competing for the viewer's attention. It's a lot less so with this. So there I go. Okay, the composition was working really nicely. Now, what's more in emphasis is not just the shapes, but it's the three colors: the red, the yellow, and the blue. And I'm thinking, okay, as a vertical composition, it's cleaner, it's simpler. The interplay between the colors works really nicely. I like the way, Yoel is sort of placed in the frame. He's not exactly in the center of the frame, but I'm shooting, but I'm still trying to sort of figure out how much of the building do I include? Do I include those little red posts? I'm really sort of refining the frame, and I'm not so much concerned with him right now. I'm just trying to explore the overall composition, because I know if I focus too much on Yoel, and I just start making the shot without considering everything else, I'm going to be disappointed with the shot. So I keep shooting, and I'm just kind of refining the frame. And I go from here, and then I get in a little tighter. So I decide, okay, I don't want to include this little white edge here or these posts here. I want to eliminate those completely. I want even less of the structure behind him. And that's when I start feeling like the frame is working really nicely, because I just have this little bit of the roof line and the color of the building and the blue of the sky, and now the shot seems, okay, this is really working for me. So I've kind of reached the culmination of the overall feel of the composition. I look at the entire frame, not just my subject, because when a person looks at the photograph, they're going to be seeing everything. I can't sit there over their shoulder and say, well, you really need to be looking at this and ignoring that. I have to make those decisions at the moment that I'm making the photograph in order to make it work. So at this point, I feel like, okay, I'm really there in terms of the composition. So now I just focus all of my attention on Yoel. And what happens is that the wind is just playing with his hair, and it's just blowing all over the place. And so all I do is I asked him to turn his face towards to my right, to his left, and the wind is just playing with his hair. And I just keep talking to him while I'm shooting here, and you can see that we get all these different expressions with the splay of hair. Sometimes his eyes are completely obscured, and it's all happening, but I just keep shooting. I'm not perfectly orienting the camera so that it's vertical. I can see that the camera is being tilted a slight bit. I'm never ever very good with keeping the camera perfectly vertical. Always having to correct it later on in Photoshop. But I'm pleased with the overall composition, and I'm just looking for the moment. I like the way his face is, gazing towards the right, and I just keep shooting a couple of frames, and I'm just showing you a selection of the shots. So, here we have and at this point, I'm just focused on his expression. So I've made the shots, I tell him we're done, and then later on when I pull the images up in Photoshop, I take a look and I start looking at these shots where it's the vertical ones. And right now, the two things I'm focused on are the splay of the hair and just his expression. Here, I don't like it because I don't like the way his teeth are in the frame. This gets a little better in terms of the placement of his mouth, but, his eyes are obscured by his hair. Here, we get a really nice expression on the face. The hair is being blown up, so we get the full frame of his face, but you still see the wonderful quality of his hair, especially against the red wall. Here, his eyes are obscured again. Obscured here. This might work. His mouth is starting to open slightly. This is kind of good, but I don't know if I like the slightly parted mouth. And here it's like he's about to whistle. It's interesting, but, I end up going back to this shot here as my final pick. I think that the expression here works beautifully. The hair is great. The overall composition and frame is just fantastic. The shirt has stripes in it that are horizontal rather than vertical, which repeat the sort of the pattern that you can see in part of the roof. So I don't mind this as much. Later on, when I edit the image in Lightroom, I'll probably selectively darken his shirt, because right now it's the brighter element of the frame, and I really want the viewer to focus more on the face, but the overall composition works really nicely. His body is slightly to the left, but his head is, pretty much in line with the center of the frame. So if we go from the peak down the center line of the gate, it leads us to his right eye. And I think overall placement, from vertically speaking, works really, really nicely. So all I really need to do is sort of correct the orientation so that it's not slightly tilted to the right, and also apply some dodging and burning selectively to sort of darken the shirt a little bit and just sort of tweak the overall contrast of the image. But this is what I'm often talking about whenever I'm talking about sort of exploring the entire frame and really exhausting all the possibilities. If I had gone with my initial inclination, or with my initial inclination, which was that horizontal image where entire background is the gate, it would have been an okay image and something him and his mother would have been very, very pleased with. I certainly would have been satisfied with it, because I know I've made shots like that before, and I constantly want to challenge myself to go further. And one of the ways that I'm often doing that is by not just taking stuff out, but deciding to put stuff back in. I'm very much into sort of simplification when I'm making compositions, but increasingly I will simplify, and then I will start adding things back to the frame to make them more complex, more interesting, more dynamic, to add depth. And I think that this shot achieves all of that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr pool, where I usually pull images to critique on this channel, you can go to Flickr, just type in the Candid Frame, and you can submit images to the Candid Frame community. We have thousands of people that are on there already, and constantly submitting some fantastic images. So next week I'll probably be pulling from that great pool of photography and providing further critiques. So all you have to do is ask to be added, and I'll be more than glad to do that. And if you are finding us for the first time and you've never heard of the Candid Frame, well, the Candid Frame is a photography podcast in which I interview great photographers about their work and career. We don't focus on gear and equipment. We focus more on creativity, people's careers, and the choices that they made in order to make great photographs. We recently had an interview with Maggie Stieber, who's a well-known photojournalist and documentary photographer. She's worked extensively in Haiti and for National Geographic. It's a great conversation. You don't want to miss it. You can go to thecandidframe.com and stream it there, or you can download the Candid Frame app, which is available for Apple, iOS, Windows, and Android. Or you can stream the interviews on YouTube now. And if you like what you're seeing in these videos, please subscribe and spread the word. So thanks a lot for joining me, and I will see you next time.